The old man sat on the porch of his ranch house watching the Montana sun paint the peaks gold. His hands, gnarled and scarred from 88 years of hard living, rested on the arms of his chair. Before him stood his grandson, 19 years old, dressed in clothes too new, too clean for this country. The boy was leaving tomorrow. The army, just like so many young men before him. Samuel shifted his weight, nervous. Grandpa, everyone says I remind them of you when you were young, but I don't know what that means. What did you do to find your purpose? Ezra Blackwood looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rough as gravel worn smooth by time. I didn't find purpose, son. I found redemption. And it came to me in the shape of a forsaken nun. The boy's eyes widened. Ezra nodded slowly. Sit down. This'll take some time. As Samuel settled onto the porch step, Ezra closed his eyes, and the years fell away like snow from a pine branch. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of memory. It was spring of 1848. I was 38 years old. I'd been living alone on the mountain for 11 years. The land near Crystal Creek held a silence that most men couldn't bear. It was the kind of quiet that got inside your head, made you hear things that weren't there. Voices, laughter, the sound of someone calling your name. Ezra Blackwood had learned to live with it. More than that, he'd learned to prefer it. He was checking his trap line that morning, moving through the territory with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd done the same thing 1,000 times before. 40 traps stretched along an 8-mile circuit through the high country. Beaver mostly, some marten if he was lucky. Occasionally a lynx, though those were getting scarce. The rifle across his back was a Hawken .50 caliber custom made in St. Louis before the mountain fur trade collapsed. Heavy enough to drop a buffalo. Accurate enough to thread a needle at 100 yards if the wind was right. He'd owned it for 14 years. In that time, it had never failed him. The morning was cold enough to show his breath. Spring in the Montana Territory was a contrary season. The snow still held in the shadows, but the creek ran fast with meltwater. Ice formed on the edges at night, broke free by midday. The land was neither winter nor summer, neither sleeping nor fully awake. He was approaching the bend near the granite outcrop when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the water or the cry of birds. Human. In pain. Ezra stopped. Listened. There it came again. A yell sharp and desperate followed by a low, ragged growl that made the hair on his neck stand up. Bear. He moved fast, unwrapped the reins from the sapling where his bay gelding stood, swung into the saddle, and kicked the horse toward the sound. His hand went to the Hawken without thought, checking the percussion cap, the powder load. Ready? The rise above the gulch gave him his first clear view. The bear was massive ribs showing under its hide. A grizzly male, probably just out of hibernation and mad with hunger. It was standing over something on the ground. Not something. Someone. A man lay beneath the bear's shadow, one arm raised weakly in defense. Blood pooled dark beneath him, soaking into the cracked earth. The bear lunged forward, jaws snapping. Ezra didn't hesitate. He dismounted in one smooth motion, took position behind a stand of mesquite, steadied his breathing, and aimed. The first shot took the bear in the shoulder. The animal reared, turning toward the sound, massive paws clawing air. The second shot caught it in the neck. Blood sprayed. The bear roared, but the sound was weaker now, wet. The third shot went clean between its eyes. The grizzly dropped like a felled tree. The ground shook with the impact. Ezra waited, counted to 10. The bear didn't move. He reloaded anyway, then walked down the slope, slowly, rifle still raised. You didn't take chances with a grizzly. He'd seen men killed by animals they thought were dead. The man on the ground wasn't moving much. Ezra crouched beside him, keeping one eye on the bear's still body. The man was old, gray threaded through black hair pulled back in a simple tie. His face was weathered, lined deep from sun and years. The clothing marked him as clergy. Black cassock, torn and bloody. A wooden cross on a leather cord around his neck. Ezra put 2 fingers to the man's throat. Pulse. Weak, but there. The old priest's eyes opened. They were clear, despite the pain, focused. They met Ezra's without fear. Ezra exhaled hard. All right, let's get you out of here. There was no way the man could walk. Ezra checked the wounds first. The bear had torn through cloth and skin along the man's ribs. 3 ribs broken, maybe 4. The left arm was worse. ripped open from wrist to elbow muscle and tendon visible, blood everywhere. Ezra had done this before. Battlefields, cattle drives, hunting accidents. He knew what would kill a man and what wouldn't. This was close but survivable if he moved fast. He folded his coat, pressed it against the worst of the wounds, then lifted the priest carefully. The man groaned once but didn't cry out. Ezra carried him to the horse, laid him across the saddle, and climbed up behind. One arm kept the priest steady, the other held the reins. The ride back to the cabin was slow. He felt the man's breathing grow more shallow against his arm with each mile. By the time they reached the timber walls of his home, the priest's shirt was soaked through with blood, and Ezra's own clothes were wet with it. The cabin was simple, 16 by 20 feet, pine logs chinked with moss and clay, a stone fireplace built by hand, one bed, one chair, one table. Shelves lined with pelts waiting to be traded, rifles on pegs above the door, 4 books on a rough-hewn shelf. No window glass, just wooden shutters, a packed earth floor hard as stone from years of use. Ezra kicked the door open, laid the priest on the bed, and lit the oil lamp. Then he moved with the speed of long practice. Water on to boil, needle and thread from the kit, clean knife from the drawer. He washed his hands in the basin, tore the priest's cassock open, and started cleaning the wounds. The bear had torn through skin and muscle, but hadn't broken bone in the arm. Luck, if you believed in it. The ribs were another matter. Cracked, possibly fractured. Nothing to do for those but wrap them in hope. He poured hot water over the wounds. The priest groaned, eyes fluttering. "Yeah," Ezra said, voice low. "That part hurts." He worked for over an hour, sewed the deep gashes in tight, slow lines, packed the worst spots with cloth, splinted the twisted arm using an old hickory stick and leather strips. It wasn't clean by a doctor's measure, but it would hold. When it was done, Ezra sat in the chair by the fire and watched the man breathe. Shallow but steady. He wasn't used to company, wasn't sure what came next, but the thought of letting a man die alone on a dirt path didn't sit right. Not after all the dying he had seen. He poured water into a cup and sat by the bedside. The priest didn't reach for it, just breathed. Ezra leaned back against the wall and let the quiet settle. He hadn't asked who the man was. Didn't know if someone would come looking for him. Didn't much care either way. He'd done what needed doing. That was enough. The priest didn't speak for 3 days. Ezra didn't expect him to. He checked the man's bandages each morning, replaced the soaked cloths with clean ones, spooned bone broth between his cracked lips. The old priest swallowed when he could, turned his head slightly, when Ezra dabbed at the fever sweat but never tried to talk. His eyes stayed sharp, though, watching every movement from the bed, tracking Ezra as he moved about the cabin. Ezra didn't ask questions. He figured if the man wanted to talk, he would. In the meantime, he kept to his routine, feeding the horses, checking the lines, hauling water from the creek using a wooden yoke across his shoulders. He worked quietly as always, but there was a different weight now. The sound of another breath in the room, the sense that someone was watching, even if they never said a word. His days followed patterns worn smooth by repetition. Wake at 5 before first light, start the fire, set coffee to boil, check the priest, change bandages if needed. Out to the trap line by 6, moving through the circuit with mechanical efficiency. 40 traps, 40 chances at beaver, marten, lynx, wolf. Sometimes he caught nothing. Sometimes 3 or 4 pelts. Today, 3 beaver and 1 marten. Good enough. Back by 9 to skin what he'd caught. The work was meditative. Careful cuts along belly and legs. Peel the hide free without tearing. Stretch it on a willow frame to dry. Salt the edges. Stack the flesh for the scavengers. Nothing wasted. By midday, he was splitting wood. 2 cords stacked against the cabin wall. Another cord for kindling. The rhythm of the axe was steady, predictable. Swing, split, stack. Swing, split, stack. The physical labor kept his mind quiet. Afternoons were for maintenance. Check the sourdough starter, 6 years old and still strong. Knead it, let it rise, bake simple bread. Smoke venison strips over green wood. Mend the tear in his buckskin shirt with sinew and a bone needle. Sharpen the skinning knife on a whetstone, testing the edge against his thumb. Not until it drew blood, just until it caught. Evenings he read. He had 4 books. Gulliver's Travels, the pages soft with handling, a Bible spine broken, pages loose. An almanac from 1845, outdated but still useful for the moon charts. Shakespeare's sonnets, a gift from his mother before she died. He read slowly, sounding out the words in his head. His education had stopped at 12, but he'd kept learning on his own. Then sleep. By 9, he was in bed. Up at 5. The same circle, day after day, season after season. On the second day, the priest began to watch him with purpose. Not just awareness, but study. When Ezra carried water past the old man's eyes followed. When he stoked the fire, the priest observed his movements. It felt like being measured against some invisible standard. On the third day, the priest did something unexpected. He reached for the charcoal stick near the fireplace, pulled a scrap of paper close, and wrote in shaky letters, "Why do you live alone?" Ezra looked at the words for a long moment. Then he sat down at the chair close enough to see the priest's face in the firelight. "Because people die alone," he said. "I'm just practicing." The priest's expression didn't change. He wrote again, "Who did you lose?" Ezra's jaw tightened. He looked at the fire, at the flames dancing over split pine. "My brother, Jacob, 1837, Battle of Bad Axe." He stopped. The priest waited. "I was a scout," Ezra continued. "Led the way for the army. Jacob followed me. Wanted to be like me, I guess. We got hit by Sauk warriors. Ambush, wrong place, wrong time." The fire crackled. Outside wind pressed against the shutters. "I survived. He didn't. Took him 3 hours to die. Gut shot. Nothing I could do but hold him and watch the blood soak into the snow." He looked back at the priest. "I taught him how to track, how to shoot, how to survive in country like this. Then I led him straight to his death." The priest's hand moved across the paper again. When he turned it, the words read, "You did not kill your brother. Didn't stop him from dying either." The old man stared at him for a long time. Then he wrote one more line before his hand went slack with exhaustion. "I will die here, but you must accept my final gift, whether you wish to or not." Ezra read the words twice, didn't understand them. By the time he looked up to ask, the priest had fallen asleep. On the morning of the fourth day, Ezra woke at 5 as always. The cabin was cold. The fire had burned down to ash. He reached for his boots, pulled them on, and stood. The bed was empty. His chest jumped. He scanned the room fast. The door stood open, swinging slightly in the dawn breeze. The priest's Bible was gone, but the wooden cross still lay on the bedside table. No blood trail, no sign of struggle. Ezra grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. Snow had fallen during the nightlight and fresh. Any tracks would be visible, but the wind had been strong. Most of the ground was swept clean. He found traces near the creek. 2 horses judging by the hoof prints. Moccasin tracks, 2 sets. Someone had come for the old priest, carried him away before dawn. Ezra followed the trail for 200 yards, then stopped. A dark stain on the rocks already frozen. Blood. Not much, but enough to show the old man had been moved while still wounded. He turned back toward the cabin. Whoever had taken the priest knew what they were doing. They'd moved quietly, efficiently. No wasted time, no hesitation. Ezra felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relief that he no longer had to care for someone else. Guilt that he felt relieved. The old man had been his responsibility, however unwanted. Now that responsibility was lifted. He spent the day checking his lines, skinning pelts, splitting wood. Normal work, normal rhythms. But something felt different. The cabin was quieter now, more empty than alone. That night, he lay in bed and stared at the ceiling beams. Thought about the priest's final written words. A gift. What kind of gift? Why, he hadn't saved the man for payment. Hadn't wanted anything in return. He was still thinking about it when sleep took him. 2 days after the priest vanished, Ezra returned from his trap line at 6:30 in the morning. The sun was just cresting the eastern peaks, turning the snow on the high ridges pink and gold. His horse plodded steadily, tired from the 8-mile circuit. 2 beaver pelts hung from the saddle. A decent morning's work. As he approached the cabin, he noticed something wrong. Smoke rose from the chimney. He'd banked the fire before leaving enough to keep embers alive, but not enough to produce smoke. Someone was inside. He dismounted quietly, tied the horse to the rail, and pulled the hawken from its scabbard. Approached the door from the side, pressed his back to the wall. Listened. No sound of movement. No voices. Just the crackle of a fire. He pushed the door open with the rifle barrel. swept the room, empty except for the figure kneeling before the fireplace. A woman, dressed in black. She didn't turn when he entered, just stayed there perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. Her back was to him, narrow shoulders hunched forward. Long black hair, slightly wavy, hung loose down her back. The black clothing was torn. One shoulder strap had separated, exposing pale skin. The hem was ripped from knee to ankle, showing her calf. Her feet were bare, dirty with mud and dried blood. Beside her sat a small cloth bag and a single loaf of dark bread. Ezra lowered the rifle slightly, but kept it ready. "You lost." She turned her head slowly. Her eyes met his, dark brown, wide, completely empty of expression, like looking into a well with no bottom. "No." Her voice was soft, steady, barely more than a whisper. He studied her face. Mid-20s maybe. Features that might have been beautiful if they weren't so hollow. Skin pale from lack of sun, lips cracked, a bruise fading to yellow on her left cheekbone. "Then what are you doing in my cabin?" "I was sent." "Sent by who?" "Mother Superior Dorothy, St. Catherine's Convent." She spoke each word with the same flat tone, as if reciting something memorized. "To repay the debt for Father Benedict's life." The name hit him like cold water. Father Benedict, the old priest. So that's who he'd saved. "I didn't ask for payment," Ezra said, voice hard. "I know." She still hadn't looked away. "But the church must pay, and I am the only thing they were willing to give." Ezra felt anger rise in his chest, not at her, at whoever sent her. "That's not how this works. I didn't save that man to collect some kind of debt." "I know," she said again. "Then why are you here?" For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not emotion exactly, more like the ghost of emotion remembered from a distance. "Because I have nowhere else to go." Ezra set the rifle against the wall, crossed his arms. "What's your name?" "Sister Miriam." A pause. "Of St. Catherine's. And they just sent you here alone 40 miles through country like this?" "Yes." "Why you?" Her hands tightened in her lap. The knuckles went white where she gripped the rosary. "Because I am extra. In the way." That's not an answer. She took a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I make people uncomfortable. I am too quiet. I do not smile when they want. I do not pretend." She paused. "And I have been touched, so I cannot stay." The word hung in the air. Touched. Ezra understood immediately what she meant. What had been done to her. His jaw clenched. "How long ago?" "6 months." "Who bandits?" "4 of them. They took me from a stagecoach." Her voice stayed flat, reporting facts. "They kept me in a canyon camp for 23 days. When the cavalry found us, I was still alive. That was my sin." Ezra felt sick. "That's not a sin. That's survival." "Survival is not purity." She said it like quoting scripture, someone else's words in her mouth. "The Mother Superior said I had been defiled, that I could not remain among the faithful. But Father Benedict made an arrangement before he died. The church would send me to you as payment for his life. It was a gift to you." A bitter edge crept into her voice. "And a solution for them." Ezra walked to the table, braced his hands on it, stared down at the scarred wood. "You don't owe me anything. I didn't do this for payment." "I know. You got family, somewhere else you could go." "No, my family disowned me when I was 16. The convent was all I had. Now I have nothing." He turned to face her. "What do you want?" The question seemed to surprise her. She blinked. "I don't understand. What do you want to happen now?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then quietly, "I want to stay, if you permit it." "Why?" "Because no one has asked me what I want in 10 years. Her voice cracked just slightly. "You are asking now. That is more than anyone else has offered." Ezra studied her, saw the exhaustion in the way she held herself. The defeat, the terrible grinding weight of having nowhere to go and no one to care. He'd been there, not the same way, but close enough to recognize it. "All right," he said. "You can stay, long as you need. But you're not payment. You're not mine. You're just here. Understand?" She nodded once. "What's your real name before they made you Sister Miriam?" She hesitated. "Elizabeth. Elizabeth Hayes. My family called me Libby." "Libby." He tested the name. It fit better than Sister Miriam. You can sleep in the bed. I'll take the floor. You don't have to do that. I'm doing it anyway. He walked to the shelf, pulled down a thick bearskin blanket, and handed it to her. You look half dead. Rest first. We'll figure the rest out later. She took the blanket carefully as if it might be taken away. Why are you helping me? Ezra looked at her, at the rope burns visible on her wrists, at the way she held herself like something broken but still trying to stand. Because nobody should get thrown away twice, he said. Something changed in her expression. Not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of hope distant and fragile. She moved to the bed, slowly lay down with her back to the room, and pulled the blanket over herself. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. Sleep took her fast and hard the way it takes people who haven't slept safely in a long time. Ezra sat in the chair and watched the fire. Wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. Wondered what kind of church sent a broken woman into the wildernesses as payment for a debt no one asked them to pay. Wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or if, maybe for the first time in 11 years, he'd done something right. Outside, the sun climbed higher. Inside the cabin held two people instead of one, and neither of them knew yet what that would mean. The morning came with the smell of fresh bread. Ezra woke on the floor where he'd slept, still wrapped in his coat. The fire was already burning. Coffee steamed in the pot, and Libby stood at the table, her hands dusted with flour-shaping dough with practiced movements. He sat up slowly, watching her work. She'd been there 3 days now, and this was the first time he'd seen her do anything without being asked. The first time she'd moved with purpose instead of just existing. She glanced at him, then back to the dough. I found your sourdough starter. I hope you don't mind. No, his voice came out rough from sleep. That's fine. She nodded and kept working. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just two people sharing space, each uncertain of the other, but willing to try. After breakfast, he asked her, You want to come check the trap line with me? She looked up surprised. You want me to? Don't want you sitting here alone all day. Might as well see what I do. She hesitated, then nodded. All right. They rode out together, Libby sitting behind him on the bay gelding. She held on to his coat with careful hands, not gripping tight, just steadying herself. The morning was cold and bright, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. At the first trap, she watched him work. The beaver was already dead, caught by the leg. He showed her how to release the spring, how to check the pelt for quality. She didn't flinch from the blood, but she didn't look comfortable either. It's necessary, he said. The killing. It's how I survive out here. I understand. She was quiet for a moment. At the convent, we raised chickens. I had to wring their necks for Sunday dinner. I never liked it, but I learned. Then you already know. Some things we do because we must, not because we want to. She met his eyes. Yes, I know that very well. They moved through the circuit together. By the third trap, she was asking questions. How do you know where to set them? What animals leave what tracks? How can you tell if a pelt is worth keeping? He answered each one, surprised by her attention to detail. She wasn't just listening, she was learning, storing information away like supplies for winter. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was high and warm. She helped him stretch the pelts on their frames, following his instructions exactly. Her hands were steady, careful, the work of someone who'd been taught precision. You're good at this, he said. I was trained to pay attention, to remember. She smoothed the beaver pelt, checking for tears. At the convent, if you made a mistake during Mass, you fasted for 3 days. You learned quickly. Ezra watched her work, seeing her differently now. Not just broken, also strong. Strong enough to survive things that would have killed weaker people. That night, she asked him a question that changed something between them. Do you believe in God? He was whittling a piece of pine, shaping it into nothing in particular, just keeping his hands busy. He stopped, considered his answer. I used to. Then I prayed for 3 hours while my brother bled to death in the snow. God didn't show. She nodded slowly. I prayed for 23 days in that canyon. He didn't come there either. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Maybe he's not the showing up type, Ezra said finally. Or maybe we're the only ones who show up for each other. She looked at him across the firelight. Maybe that's all there is. Ezra met her gaze and saw something there he hadn't seen before. Not emptiness, understanding, the recognition of one survivor seeing another. Maybe you're right, he said. That night she moved her bedroll closer to the fire, not close to him, just closer, 3 feet of space instead of 6. It was a small thing, but it mattered. On the 8th day she cut herself. Ezra heard the knife clatter to the floor and turned from the fireplace where he'd been stoking the coals. Libby stood at the table, staring down at her hand. Blood welled from a deep gash across her palm, dripping onto the cutting board where she'd been slicing turnips. She didn't cry out, didn't move, just stood there watching the blood fall, like she was observing something happening to someone else. Let me see. He crossed the room in 3 strides, took her wrist gently, turned her hand to the light. The cut was clean, but deep, running from the base of her thumb to the edge of her palm. It would need stitches. He wrapped her hand tight in the clean cloth, pressing hard to slow the bleeding. Hold still. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Just watched him work with those dark, unreadable eyes. He heated water, poured whiskey over the wound. She bit her lip, but made no sound. He threaded a needle with horsehair, the same kind he used for mending leather, steadied her hand against the table. This is going to hurt. I know. He made the first stitch. Her fingers twitched, but she kept still. He worked slowly, carefully, 7 stitches in a precise line. His hands didn't shake. 14 years of living alone had taught him to be his own doctor, his own surgeon. You learned or you died. When he tied off the last stitch, he looked up and found her watching his face instead of her hand. You're very good at this, she said quietly. Had a lot of practice. On yourself. Mostly. He wrapped her hand in clean cloth, tied it secure. Though I've patched up a few trappers over the years, men who got careless. She looked down at her bandaged hand. I'm not afraid of you. The words came out of nowhere. Ezra froze, still holding her wrist. That's good, he said. Sid, yeah, it is. She pulled her hand back, gently cradled it against her chest. The men who took me, at first I thought they might let me go. They smiled. They spoke kindly. Then when it was dark, she stopped. I learned that kind words mean nothing. But you don't speak kind words. You just do kind things. That's different. Ezra didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just nodded and went back to the fire. But something had shifted. Some invisible wall had developed a crack. That night, Libby woke screaming. Ezra jerked awake on the floor, reaching for his rifle before his mind caught up to his instincts. Then he heard the words. Latin. She was speaking Latin. Miserere me Deus secundum magnum misericordiam tuam. Have mercy on me, God, according to your great mercy. She thrashed in the bed, caught in some nightmare Ezra couldn't see. Her hands clawed at invisible attackers. Her voice rose higher, desperate. He stood, approached slowly, stopped 6 feet from the bed. Libby, wake up. She didn't hear him, kept fighting the dream. Libby, louder now, her eyes snapped open. Wild, terrified. She saw him standing there and scrambled backward against the wall, pulling the blanket up like a shield. Don't touch me. Ezra raised both hands, palms out. I'm not touching you. You're safe. It was a dream. She stared at him, chest heaving, taking long seconds to recognize where she was, who he was. When understanding finally came, she collapsed forward, face in her hands. I'm sorry. I thought I was back there. I thought you were... I know. He sat down on the floor, deliberately putting distance between them. I'm not them. You're safe here. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. Do you have nightmares? Every night. What do you dream about? Ezra looked at the fire, at the dancing shadows on the wall. My brother, lying in the snow, blood coming from his belly. I press my hands to the wound, but the blood just flows through my fingers. I can still hear him saying my name. Ezra, I'm cold. I'm so cold. And I can't do anything but watch him die. The silence that followed was heavy with shared pain. We both carry the dead inside us, Libby whispered. Yeah, we do. I don't want to carry them alone anymore. Ezra looked at her, saw the vulnerability in her face, the desperate need for connection warring with fear. You don't have to. Not here. Will you stay? Just sit there until I fall asleep. Long as you need. He stayed on the floor back against the wall while she lay down again and tried to sleep. It took hours. Every time she closed her eyes, they'd snap open again, checking that he was still there, that she was still safe. Finally, near dawn, exhaustion won. Her breathing slowed, deepened. Sleep took her. Ezra didn't move. Just sat there in the growing light, keeping watch over someone who'd been betrayed by every promise of safety she'd ever been given. When the sun finally rose, he was still there. By the third week, they developed a rhythm. She rose before him now, starting the fire, making coffee. He'd wake to warmth and the smell of food, small comforts he'd lived without for 11 years. They'd eat together in silence, then head out to check the trapline. She learned fast. How to read animal tracks. How to set a trap without catching your own fingers. How to skin a beaver without tearing the pelt. She had good hands, steady and precise. One morning she asked, "Will you teach me to shoot?" Ezra looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. "Why? Because you're not always here, and I should know how to protect myself." He couldn't argue with that. The next day he took her to a clearing a half-mile from the cabin, set up a target on a dead pine, and handed her his Kentucky long rifle. "It's lighter than the Hawken, good for learning." She took it carefully, testing the weight. "What do I do?" he showed her. "Stance first. Feet, shoulder width, knees slightly bent. How to hold the rifle butt against the shoulder cheek pressed to the stock. How to sight down the barrel. Breathe in, let half of it out, hold. Squeeze the trigger, don't pull." The first shot knocked her on her backside. The recoil was stronger than she'd expected. She sat in the dirt, stunned. Ezra helped her up, his hand on her back. First real physical contact between them that lasted more than a second. "You all right?" She nodded. Again. They worked for 2 hours. At first she couldn't hit anything, then she grazed the edge of the target. By the end of the session, she put a shot within 6 inches of center. "You're a natural," he said. She smiled. It was small, barely a curve of her lips, but it was the first real smile he'd seen from her. "I feel stronger." "You were always strong. Now you just have a weapon to match." Walking back to the cabin, she carried the rifle herself. He noticed she held her head higher, walked with more certainty. Something had changed in her. That evening, she organized his medical supplies, grouping them by function. Added herbs from her own small collection. Wild ginger, elderberry, St. John's wort. "Where'd you learn about these?" he asked. "The convent. We cared for the sick. I was taught which plants heal, which ones harm." She held up a dried root. "This one stops infection. This one brings down fever. This one eases pain. You're a healer." "I was being trained as one. Before—" She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Ezra watched her work, seeing her with new eyes. She wasn't just surviving here. She was building something. Creating purpose from the wreckage of her old life. "Libby Tama," he said. She looked up. "I'm glad you stayed." She held his gaze for a long moment. "So am I." In the 7th week, everything changed. Ezra came back from checking the trap line and knew immediately something was wrong. He felt feverish, his left arm ached. When he pulled back his sleeve, he saw the old bare scratch had turned red and swollen. The wound from 2 months ago, the one he'd thought was healed. Infection. By nightfall, his fever was climbing. Libby made him lie down, pulled off his shirt, and examined the wound. Her face went pale. "This is bad, very bad." "I know. I need to cut it open, drain the infection." "Do it." She heated his skinning knife in the fire until the blade glowed, poured whiskey over the wound. Then without hesitation, she cut. Ezra screamed, couldn't help it. The pain was white-hot, blinding. Pus and blood drained from the wound, thick and foul-smelling. She packed it with yarrow paste and spider webs, the old remedies she'd learned at the convent. Wrapped it tight. Made him drink willow bark tea until he wanted to vomit. For 3 days he burned with fever, drifted in and out of consciousness. In his delirium, he spoke to ghosts. "Jacob, I'm sorry. I couldn't save you. I tried. God, I tried." And later, desperately, "Don't leave me. Please don't leave." Libby stayed by his side the entire time. Didn't sleep, just dozed in 20-minute intervals. Changed his bandages. Forced him to drink. Kept cold compresses on his forehead. On the 3rd night, his fever spiked to dangerous levels. She could feel the heat radiating off him. Made a decision born of desperation. Dragged the wooden washtub close to the bed, filled it with cold water from the creek. and somehow using strength she didn't know she had got him into it. The shock of the cold water jolted him awake. "Libby, you're awake," she was crying. "Thank God you're awake." He tried to speak, but she wrapped her arms around him, heedless of the water soaking her dress. "I thought I was going to lose you. I can't lose anyone else. I can't." His hand came up, weakly touched her hair. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." By morning, his fever had broken. He woke to find her asleep beside the bed, one hand still holding a wet cloth. Her face was drawn with exhaustion. He reached out carefully, touched her hair. She woke instantly. "How do you feel?" "Like I got kicked by a mule, but alive, thanks to you." She sat up, pushed hair from her face. "I couldn't let you die. I couldn't bear another loss. I'm not planning on dying anytime soon." She looked at him with something raw and unguarded in her expression. "Good, because I think I need you." After he fell back asleep, she whispered something she didn't think he could hear. "I think I'm falling in love with you." But he heard it, and lying there with his eyes closed, he felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for 11 years, cracking like ice in spring. Recovery was slow. For a week, Ezra was too weak to do more than sit in the chair and give instructions. Libby took over the trap line entirely. She'd ride out at dawn, check all 40 traps, bring back whatever she caught, and skin it herself. When she brought in 2 beavers and a fox, all skinned properly, he stared in amazement. "You remembered everything." "I learned from the best." She hung the pelts to dry. Besides, someone had to keep us from starving. She'd reorganized the entire cabin while he was sick, built a shelf for her herbs, started a small garden and planters growing wild onion and sage from seeds she'd collected, washed every blanket and dried them in the sun. The place felt different, lived in, like a home instead of just a shelter. One evening as spring turned definitively towards summer, Ezra opened the old trunk at the foot of his bed, pulled out something wrapped in muslin. A dress, calico blue with small white flowers. It had belonged to his mother. He carried it to Libby. "This was my ma's. She died 20 years ago. I kept it, don't really know why. Now I think I do. It was waiting for the right person." Libby touched the fabric like it was sacred. "I haven't worn color since I was 16. "You're not a nun here. You're just Libby." She took the dress with trembling hands. "May I try it?" "It's yours." The next morning, she emerged from behind the curtain wearing the blue calico. It fit snugly across her chest and waist, the fabric pulling slightly at the seams. She'd let her hair down long and dark, falling past her shoulders in waves. Ezra stared. He'd gotten used to seeing her in the black habit or in his old shirts. This was different. She looked alive, real, beautiful. He turned away quickly. "Looks good." "I feel exposed." She smoothed the skirt nervously. "Like I'm not wearing enough." "You look human. That's a good thing." She caught his reflection in the small mirror on the wall, saw him watching her. Their eyes met in the glass. Neither of them looked away. By the 12th week, something had fundamentally changed between them. They moved around each other with easy familiarity. He'd reach for something, and she'd already have it ready. She'd start a task, and he'd join in without being asked. One night, sitting by the fire, she said something that surprised him. "I want you to give me a new name." He looked up from the wood he was carving. "You already have a name." "Elizabeth was my father's choice. Miriam was the church's choice. I want something that's mine, and I choose to let you name me." "Why me?" "Because you're the first person who let me choose anything, so I choose to let you name me." Ezra set down his knife. Thought for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful, serious. "You stayed when you could have left. Through blizzards and sickness and fear. You stayed, so your name should mean that." He paused. "Constance, it means steadfast." Tears filled her eyes. "Constance Hayes. Constance Blackwood." He said it slowly. "If you'll have it." She went very still. "Is that a proposal?" "I don't have a ring, don't have a preacher, but I have a cabin and a life and a promise I'll never make you feel like property." "Then yes." She said it without hesitation. "Yes." They wrote their own vows by firelight. No preacher, no witnesses, just 2 people choosing each other. Ezra spoke first. I take you as my wife, not by law, not by God's decree, but because you're mine and I'm yours, and that's all that matters. Constance's voice was steady. I take you as my husband. I give myself freely, not as payment, not as duty, but as choice. My choice. He gave her a ring he'd carved from elk ivory, rare and precious. She gave him her rosary, the symbol of her old life, laid down forever. I don't need this anymore, she said. I have you. That night they lay down together for the first time with no distance between them. She looked at him in the firelight, her hand on his chest. I want this. I choose you. We don't have to. She put a finger to his lips. I know. But I want to. For the first time I want to. They made love slowly, carefully. She cried afterward, but not from pain, from relief. I'm not ruined, she whispered against his chest. I'm not broken. He held her close. You were never broken. They just tried to make you think you were. She fell asleep in his arms, her breathing soft and even. And Ezra lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling something he hadn't felt in 11 years. Peace. In the morning she woke before him and watched him sleep. Touched the ring on her finger. Whispered to herself, I am Constance Blackwood, and I am free. Outside, summer was fully arrived. The snow had retreated to the highest peaks. Wildflowers bloomed in the meadows. And inside the cabin, two broken-hearted people had found a way to make each other whole. The old man's voice faded. He looked at his grandson on the porch steps. That was how we became husband and wife, not in a church, not with papers, but in the way that mattered most. By choosing each other when the world had given us both every reason to choose solitude instead. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. What happened next, Grandpa? Ezra smiled, but there was sadness in it. That's when the world came looking for her. That's when we learned that choosing each other was only the beginning. The real test was keeping that choice when everyone else wanted to take it away. He stood slowly, bones creaking. But that's a story for tomorrow night. You need rest. Got a long journey ahead of you. As Samuel headed inside, Ezra looked out at the sunset painting, the Montana peaks gold and red. Somewhere in the house, his wife was putting their great-grandchildren to bed. Constance, still steadfast after all these years. He touched the elk ivory ring on his own finger, worn smooth by decades of wear. Some debts he thought weren't debts at all. They were gifts. You just had to be wise enough to recognize them. Summer came to the high country with a gentleness that felt like grace. The meadows filled with lupine and Indian paintbrush. The creek ran clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from the peaks. Elk grazed in the valley at dawn, and eagles circled overhead, riding thermals up toward the sun. Constance and Ezra worked the land together now. True partners. She could check half the trap line on her own track, and elk through timber red, weather in the shape of clouds. He taught her everything he knew, and she learned with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent too long being helpless. In the evening, she read Shakespeare to him by firelight. His reading was slow halting, so she took over. Her voice brought the words alive in ways he'd never managed on his own. Sometimes he'd carve while she read his knife-shaping wood into small animals. An elk, a beaver, a mountain lion. He gave them to her without comment, and she kept them on the shelf he'd built for her herbs. They were building something, not just a life, but a world. Small and isolated, but entirely their own. One afternoon in late July, a stranger appeared on the trail. Constance saw him first. She was hanging wash on the line behind the cabin when movement caught her eye, a rider still distant but coming steadily toward them. She went inside quickly. Ezra, someone's coming. He was at the door in seconds, rifle in hand. Together they watched the rider approach, a man young wearing black. As he got closer, Ezra could make out the white collar. A priest. Stay behind me, Ezra said quietly. The rider stopped at the fence line, raised one hand in greeting. He was maybe 28, clean-shaven, with an open face that hadn't yet learned to hide anything. Mr. Blackwood. That's right. My name is Brother Timothy Fletcher. I've come from St. Catherine's Convent. Ezra's grip on the rifle tightened. What do you want? Timothy dismounted, kept his hands visible. I'm looking for Sister Miriam Hayes. Mother Superior sent me to bring her back. Constance stepped out from behind Ezra. She wore the blue calico dress, her hair loose and uncovered. There's no one here by that name. Timothy's eyes widened. Sister Miriam, my name is Constance Blackwood. Her voice was steady, clear. I am not Sister Miriam anymore. You can't just renounce your vows. I have. I am no longer a bride of Christ. I am Ezra Blackwood's wife. Timothy looked between them, clearly struggling. This isn't valid. There was no priest, no ceremony. There was a ceremony, Ezra said. We spoke vows, exchanged tokens, chose each other. That's more valid than any words some stranger could say over us. Mother Superior insists that you return, Timothy said, focusing on Constance. You belong to the church. I belong to myself. Constance's hand found Ezra's, and I choose to belong with him. That's the only thing that matters. Timothy shifted uncomfortably. Please, if you'll just listen, this isn't really about your vows. Something in his tone made Ezra lower the rifle slightly. Then what's it about? The young priest looked miserable. It's about what you know, what you might tell people. I don't understand, Constance said. Timothy took a deep breath. The men who took you, the bandits, one of them was Father Benedict's nephew, Jeremiah Walsh. The words hit like a physical blow. Constance took a step back. What? The church knew. After the cavalry found you, they identified the men. When they discovered one was Benedict's nephew, they paid the others to keep quiet. They negotiated your release, but they also bought silence. Ezra felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. The church paid the men who raped her, not to take her, but to release her quietly, to avoid scandal. Timothy wouldn't meet their eyes. Mother Superior fears you'll tell someone, that you'll ruin the convent's reputation. Constance's voice came out strangled. Benedict knew. That's why he sent me here. Not to repay you, to silence me. I think so, yes. They paid my rapists. She said it slowly, testing the words. They protected a priest's family instead of protecting me. I'm sorry. Timothy looked genuinely anguished. I didn't know until yesterday. Mother Superior told me what to say, but I had to tell you the truth. Ezra set the rifle down carefully. If he kept holding it, he might use it. Get off my land. Please, Now. Timothy mounted his horse, but before he left, he pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. This is for you, from Bishop Carmichael. Mother Superior doesn't know I have it. He handed it to Constance. He wants you to know the truth. All of it. He rode away quickly, leaving them standing in the yard. Constance opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter written in careful script. She read it aloud. Mrs. Blackwood, I am writing to confess the sins of our church against you. Father Benedict's nephew was indeed among your captors. When this was discovered, money changed hands. Silence was purchased. You were sent away not as an honor, but as an exile. This was wrong. This was evil. I am working to make it right, but I know that words cannot undo what was done. If you wish to speak publicly about what happened, I will support you. If you wish for justice, I will help you seek it. You owe the church nothing, but the church owes you everything. Bishop Michael Carmichael. Constance lowered the letter. Tears streamed down her face. Not sad tears, angry ones. They made me think it was my fault. They made me believe I was dirty, ruined, unworthy. And all along they were protecting my rapist because he was family. Ezra pulled her close. It was never your fault. Not for 1 second. She pressed her face against his chest, and he felt her shake with rage and grief. They stood there for a long time while the sun moved across the sky, and the horses grazed peacefully, and the world continued its slow turn, indifferent to their pain. Finally, Constance pulled back. Her eyes were red, but her jaw was set. I want to write to the bishop. I want to tell him everything, every detail. I want the world to know what they did. Are you sure? I've been silent for 6 months. I'm done being silent. She wrote the letter that night, 3 pages front and back. Every detail of her captivity, every failure of the church afterward, every lie they'd told her about her own worth. When she was finished, she sealed it and handed it to Ezra. Will you take this to Fort Benton, mail it from there? Of course. Thank you. She took his hand. For everything, for seeing me when everyone else looked away. He kissed her forehead. You're my wife, my partner. I'll always see you. The next morning he prepared for the journey. 3 days to Fort Benton, and 3 days back, 6 days apart, the longest they'd been separated since she arrived. As he saddled his horse, Constance touched his arm. Ezra, there's something I need to tell you. He looked at her. I'm pregnant. The world stopped. He stared at her, unable to process the words. You're certain? 3 months. I'm certain. 1,000 thoughts rushed through his mind at once. Trey's terror. His mother dying in childbirth in this very cabin. Blood on the floor. A child screams. Are you afraid? She asked quietly. Yes. So am I, but I want this. I want our child. He pulled her into his arms, held her tight. I won't let anything happen to you, I swear it. I know you'll try, but some things we can't control. Then I'll find someone who can help, the best midwife in the territory. She pulled back to look at him. You do that, leave the mountain, go to people for me. For you, I'd do anything. He rode out within the hour. Fort Benton was 3 days of hard riding through country Ezra hadn't seen in years. The settlement had grown. More buildings, more people. The noise and smell and press of humanity made him want to turn back, but he pushed through. At the trading post, he asked the clerk, who's the best midwife around here? You'd want Helga Schmidt, German woman tough as nails, lives in the boarding house on 2nd Street. Ezra found her an hour later. She was exactly as described. 62 years old, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, hands like gnarled roots. She looked him up and down with sharp blue eyes. You need a midwife. My wife does. She's 3 months along. Where do you live? 3 days from here, up in the high country. Helga raised an eyebrow. You're a mountain man. Used to be, now I'm just a man trying to keep his wife alive. Why come to me? Because they said you're the best, and I need the best. She studied him for a long moment. What can you pay? He showed her. 40 beaver pelts, 12 marten, 1 full bearskin, worth $500, maybe more. A fortune. Helga's expression softened slightly. Your wife must be very special. She's everything. I'll come, but I stay until the baby is born. Could be 6 months. I'll take care of you, whatever you need. She nodded once. We leave tomorrow. That night, Ezra mailed Constance's letter to the bishop. Watched the clerk stamp it and add it to the outgoing mail. Felt something settle in his chest. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The return journey took 4 days with Helga. She rode well for her age, asked pointed questions about Constance's health, her history, the conditions of the cabin. Your wife, where is she from? Boston, she was a nun. She chose me instead of the church. Helga smiled, the first real warmth he'd seen from her. Smart woman. When they crested the final ridge and the cabin came into view, Constance was standing in the doorway. She saw them and her face lit up with relief. You came back, she said when Ezra dismounted. Always. He helped Helga down. This is Helga Schmidt. She's going to help when the time comes. Helga looked Constance up and down with a professional eye. Let me examine you. Inside, she checked Constance thoroughly. Listened to her belly, felt the position of the baby, asked about symptoms. Finally, she nodded. Healthy, strong, good hips. Baby is positioned correctly. She paused. I see scars, old ones. Who did that? Constance met her eyes steadily. Men who took me before I found my husband. Are they dead? Some of them. Helga spat into the fireplace. Men. The worst thing God ever made, most of them. But this one, she nodded at Ezra. He's decent. You keep him. Despite everything, Constance smiled. I intend to. Over the following weeks, Helga taught Constance everything she knew. Breathing techniques for labor, positions that would help the baby come easier, what to do if the cord wrapped around the neck, how to recognize when something was going wrong. They talked while they worked. Women's talk. Helga had delivered over 200 babies in her life. Lost only 6. She told Constance the truth, didn't sugarcoat the danger. Childbirth is a battle. Sometimes the mother wins, sometimes the baby, sometimes both. You have to be strong. I am strong, Constance said. I survived things that should have killed me. Good, then you'll survive this too. The months passed. Constance's belly grew. She moved differently, slower, but with purpose. Ezra built a cradle from pine wood, carved animals into the headboard. Made her a rocking chair, stocked supplies. One night in September, Constance asked him the question that had been haunting her. If you have to choose between me and the baby, who do you save? Don't ask me that. Promise me, Ezra. Promise that you'll choose me. He took her hands. I promise I won't lose you. Either of you. That's not the same thing. It's the only promise I can make. She didn't push, just held his hands and felt the baby move between them, a flutter like wings. The first snow came in mid-October, light just dusting the peaks. Helga looked at the sky and said, soon, baby will come soon. She was right. 3 days later, just past midnight, Constance woke with a gasp. Ezra, it's time. He was up instantly, lighting lamps, stoking the fire. Helga emerged from her corner, already moving with calm efficiency. How far apart are the pains? 10 minutes, maybe less. Good, we have time. Ezra, boil water, lots of it. Get clean cloths, then stay close. The labor lasted 14 hours. Constance walked the cabin for the first 6 hours as Ezra supporting her when the contractions came. She breathed through them like Helga had taught her, focused on a point on the wall, counting in her head. When the pains got too intense to walk, she lay on the bed. Ezra held her hand. She gripped it so hard he thought she might break bones, but he didn't pull away. I can't do this, she gasped during a particularly bad contraction. Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know. It hurts. I know, but you're doing it. You're bringing our child into the world. Hour 7, hour 10, hour 12. The contractions came faster, harder. Constance screamed, cursed, begged for it to be over. Helga checked her progress. Almost there. When the next one comes, you push. Understand? Constance nodded, too exhausted to speak. The next contraction built like a wave. Helga gave the command. Push now. Constance bore down with everything she had. Once, twice, 3 times. I can see the head, Helga said. One more. Big push. Constance gathered her strength, gripped Ezra's hand, and pushed with everything she had left. Then Helga's face changed. Wait, stop pushing. What's wrong? Ezra demanded. Shoulder is stuck. The baby's shoulder is caught. She looked at Ezra. I need you to help. Put your hand here. When I say push down, hard. Ezra's hands shook. I'll hurt her. If you don't, they both die. Do it. He placed his hand where Helga indicated, felt the baby's shoulder under Constance's skin. Now, he pushed. Felt the shoulder rotate under his palm. Constance screamed a sound that would haunt him forever. But the baby moved, slipped free, into Helga's waiting hands. A tiny girl, pink and perfect, screaming her lungs out. Helga cut the cord with practiced efficiency, cleaned the baby, wrapped her in soft cloth, placed her on Constance's chest. You have a daughter. Constance looked down at the tiny face, the miniature hands already grasping at air. Tears streamed down her face. She's perfect. Ezra couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He reached out with one shaking finger, touched his daughter's hand. She gripped it immediately, her tiny fingers wrapping around his. What will you name her? Helga asked. Constance looked at Ezra. Your mother. What was her name? His voice came out rough, choked. Grace. Grace Blackwood. Constance kissed the baby's forehead. Welcome to the world, little one. Ezra sat on the bed beside his wife and daughter. Put his arm around Constance, looked down at the baby in her arms. For the first time in 11 years, he cried. Not from pain or loss, from joy so overwhelming he couldn't contain it. They stayed like that for hours. 3 people who'd all found each other against impossible odds. A family. Outside, the first real snow of winter began to fall, soft and silent, covering the world in white. Inside, a fire burned warm. A baby slept. And 2 people who'd been broken by the world held each other and their child and knew they'd finally found home. The winter was hard, but they had enough. Ezra had laid in supplies, dried meat, preserved vegetables, enough wood to burn for months. Helga stayed as promised, teaching Constance how to nurse, how to calm a crying baby, how to recognize sickness from normal fussiness. Grace was a good baby. She slept in the cradle Ezra had built, woke only twice a night to feed. When she cried, Constance would pick her up and rock her, singing soft lullabies and Latin songs from her convent days, given new meaning. By spring, Helga prepared to leave. You don't need me anymore. You're a natural mother. Thank you, Constance said, for everything. Take care of that man of yours and that baby. They're good ones. After Helga left, life settled into a new rhythm. Constance wore the baby in a sling while she worked. Grace watched the world with curious eyes, taking it all in. One morning in April, nearly 6 months after Grace's birth, a rider appeared on the trail. Ezra saw him first, recognized the bearing immediately. Clergy, but not young like Timothy. This man was old, silver-haired, riding a fine horse. He carried no weapons, raised one hand in peace as he approached. Ezra stepped out with his rifle. That's close enough. The old man stopped. Mr. Blackwood, my name is Bishop Michael Carmichael. I've come to speak with Mrs. Blackwood, if she'll allow it. Constance emerged from the cabin, Grace on her hip. The baby was 6 months old now, chubby and healthy with her father's dark eyes. I'm Mrs. Blackwood, Constance said. What do you want? The bishop dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. I came to confess and to apologize. You can do both from there. He nodded, accepting the boundary. Your letter reached Rome. A full investigation was launched. Father Benedict's nephew and 2 others have been arrested. They'll stand trial for what they did to you. Constance's expression didn't change. And the church's payment to them? Documented, proven. Mother Superior Dorothy has been removed from her position. St. Catherine's Convent is under new leadership. The practices that allowed this to happen are being reformed. Because I spoke up. Yes, because you had the courage to tell the truth when we tried to bury it. Silence stretched between them. Grace made a small sound, and Constance adjusted her automatically, never taking her eyes off the bishop. Why are you here? She asked finally. Why tell me this in person? Because the church failed you. I failed you, and I needed you to know that I know it, that I'm ashamed of it. Are you asking for forgiveness? No. He met her eyes steadily. I have no right to ask that. I'm simply offering the truth and asking what I can do to make amends. Constance looked at him for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was calm, measured. I can't forgive the church. What was done to me, what was hidden, the way I was blamed for surviving. That's not something I can forgive. The bishop nodded, accepting it. But, she continued, I can release you. I carried your shame for 6 months. Believed I was dirty, ruined, unworthy. I won't carry your guilt too. That's yours to bear. What will you do now? She looked at Ezra, at Grace, at the cabin behind them. I'll live. I'll raise my daughter. I'll love my husband. I'll be free. The church owes you restitution. Money, land, whatever you need. I don't want your money. Then what can I give you? Constance thought for a moment. Change the rules. Make it so the next woman who survives isn't punished for living. Make it so the church protects victims instead of protecting its reputation. Do that and you'll have paid your debt. The bishop bowed his head. I swear it. On my life and my soul, I swear it. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a leather purse. This is $5,000. Restitution from the church. If you won't take it for yourself, take it for others. Build something good with it. He set it on the ground, mounted his horse, and rode away without another word. Ezra picked up the purse, weighed it in his hand. What do you want to do with it? Constance looked at Grace, peaceful in her arms. I want to build a place for women like me. Women who've been hurt and have nowhere to go. A refuge. We'll call it Mountain Mercy. That's a good name. Will you help me? He kissed her forehead. Always. The old man's voice faded. The sun had set fully now, leaving only the last purple traces of twilight on the horizon. Samuel sat on the porch steps, stunned by the story. That was 1849, Ezra said quietly. Grace is 60 now, married a school teacher named William. They gave us 3 grandchildren. Those grandchildren gave us great-grandchildren. The one you were playing with today, little Sarah, she's 4 years old. 5th generation from Constance and me. And Mountain Mercy. Still running. Your grandmother manages it now. We've helped over 300 women rebuild their lives. Some stayed a week, some stayed a year. All of them left stronger than they came. Samuel shook his head in wonder. I can't believe Grandma was a nun. She was a lot of things. Nun, survivor, healer, wife, mother. But most of all, she was free. That's what she chose. Freedom. The door opened. Constance stepped out, moving slowly but steadily at 86. Her hair was white now, but her eyes were still the same dark brown that had met Ezra's across a cabin floor 60 years ago. "Are you filling that boy's head with stories again?" she asked, but she was smiling. "Just telling him how we met." She settled into the chair beside him. Their hands found each other automatically, fingers intertwining. The elk ivory ring on his finger clicked softly against her wedding band, a proper gold one he'd bought her 20 years after their first vows. "Did you tell him the important part?" she asked. "What's that?" "That sometimes the things we think are debts are really gifts. We just have to be brave enough to accept them." Samuel stood. "Thank you, Grandpa. Grandma, I'll remember." As he went inside, Ezra and Constance sat together in the growing dark. Behind them through the window, they could hear their family. Grace reading to the children. The sound of laughter. The ordinary magic of a life well lived. "Do you ever regret it?" Ezra asked quietly. "Leaving the church, choosing this?" Constance squeezed his hand. "Not for 1 second. They gave me rules and shame. You gave me choice and love. That was never really a choice at all." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. The same stars that had watched over them for 60 years. Through pain and healing. Through fear and courage. Through death and birth and all the small moments in between that made a life. Two people who'd been thrown away by the world. Who'd found each other in the wilderness. Who'd chosen each other every day since. The debt that had brought them together wasn't a debt at all. It was grace. The kind you couldn't earn or deserve. The kind that found you when you needed it most. And they'd spent 60 years proving that the best things in life weren't obligations. They were choices, made freely, honored daily, built into something that lasted. Ezra lifted their joined hands, kissed her knuckles gently. "I love you, Constance Blackwood. And I love you, Ezra Blackwood. Every day. Still." The mountains stood eternal around them. The stars wheeled overhead. And two old people held hands in the dark, grateful for every moment they'd been given, every choice they'd made, every year they'd had together. Inside, a great-grandchild laughed. The sound of the future built on the foundation of two people who'd refused to let the world define them. They'd written their own story, spoken their own vows, built their own kind of family. And it had been enough, more than enough. It had been everything.